This podcast is brought to you by Eventide, makers of the legendary Harmonizer. Their new H9000 is the culmination of almost 50 years of audio innovation. To learn more about their award-winning effects processors and plugins, visit eventideaudio.com.
Hey, it's Larry Crane. Welcome to the Tape Op Podcast. Tony Visconti needs no introduction. His name is synonymous with the long career of David Bowie and also his work with other important artists like T.Rex, Gentle Giant, the Moody Blues, Thin Lizzy, Adam Ant, Morrissey, The Alarm, Angelique Kido, Iggy Pop, The Damned, and countless others. We interviewed Tony in 2002 for Tape Op issue number 29, but it seemed like a great time to reconnect, and that's exactly what Online Publisher Geoff Stanfield did at Tony's New York City studio in October of 2019. Enjoy.
Well, thanks again for doing this. And you were just mentioning London, and I had a conversation with Richard yesterday, and as conversations with mutual friends often will do, it sounds like we had a little bit of a game of telephone, which I thought was really funny because your response to my email made me laugh. So I would love to talk about your, very sort of the very early part of your career where you were living in Brooklyn and then you're in London. So how did you get to London?
I got to London because I was writing songs, and I was embarking on a career as a songwriter, singer-songwriter with my wife then, whose name was Sigrid, and we were kind of a psychedelic version of Sonny and Cher.
Oh, nice.
Yes, and so one day I'm in my publisher's office, and he said to me, I don't like your songs, Tony. I just don't like them, but I love your demos. So at the time, I had a little demo studio at home, and I could do a fair amount of overdubbing and get my demos to sound really professional. So I thought I was fired. I thought that was it. I had no future whatsoever.
Fired from
the music business,
okay,
from the recording
there's
business.
There's just no hope.
I thought I was going to go back and play weddings and bar mitzvahs.
Right.
I could read and write music, so I could play with big bands, anything, any job available. But I thought this job was closed to me. And then I met in the same office, in the publisher's office, I met a British record producer called Denny Cordell, who had produced groups called The Move and Denny Lane from the original Moody Blues, and a woman called Beverly. And he had a new group called Procol Harum. So I met him by the water cooler, and I went for a cup of water, and so did he. And then we got to chat, and he said, what do you do here? And I said, well, I've just become the house record producer. And he said, well, so am I in London. I'm for the same company. So we really bonded on that. He said, can I play you my latest production? So we found an empty office, and he played a whiter shade of pale to me. And I just couldn't believe what I heard. I already loved the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Donovan, and I had so many British favorites that made me long and yearn to go over to London. And now he's playing me Procol Harum, who I couldn't even make out what their genre was. It was R&B.
Right.
But so anyway, he said, I've got a session down the road, and I'm recording a little track for Georgie Fame, who I already loved already. Georgie Fame was like a kind of a jazzer who did a few pop records.
Okay.
So, and I said, well, can I watch? Can I see the charts? Because he was using Clark Terry on trumpet, famous jazz guy and all that, and a famous rhythm section. Like I couldn't hire these guys; they're all top-notch people.
Right.
But I wanted to see what was happening. So he said, I don't have any arrangements. I don't have a chart. And I said, well, this is Local 802, Musicians Union Local 802. If you ask Clark Terry and all those people to write the chart, you're going to be paid triple, you know. You have to pay them triple, rather. So he turned white and said, what can I do? I said, I can write you a chord chart. I can write you those trumpet parts on the demo that over the chords. I could write the drum breaks all on one sheet of music. And he says, really, you can do that? And I said, watch my speed. And I did that in about 20 minutes and put it on a Xerox machine. It was,
how old were you
I was 22.
Okay.
22 years old. And we made about 7 or 8 copies and ran down the road to A&R Studios, which was Phil Ramone's studio. He was the R in the A&R. And there was the band. There was my idol, Clark Terry, on trumpet. And the session was a success within 30 minutes. We had a backing track. No Georgie Fame. Georgie Fame was back in London, you know.
Right.
And he looked at me very admirably and he said, I'm looking to find an American arranger, co-producer to take back to London with me, to hire in London. And he said, I'm going to put you on my list. And he said, I'm going to go to L.A. tomorrow and see Phil Spector and see if he'll come back to London with me. And I said, well, good luck on that. Yeah. Good luck getting Phil Spector to be your assistant producer, you know. So about 2 weeks later, I got the phone call, when could you come? And this was, to me, it was such a shock because I had no means of even buying a plane ticket. I was really poor. And my wife and I were struggling. We were doing like, I was still doing weddings to make a living so we could afford our rent.
Sure.
And so I was on a plane in about a week's time, landed in London, and the rest, they say, is history.
Yeah. So how did you find yourself becoming less of part of the artist community or making that a focus once you got there and having to actually really learn that trade? You know, what did you see that you borrowed and went on to use as part of your DNA in terms of your production?
Well, I knew how to make records. I mean, it was no mystery to me. I'd been a session player. I've been on other people's sessions. I heard that voice from the control room. In those days, that they would come out of a speaker, you weren't allowed in the control room in the late 60s. Only in London I found out that everyone was more open and free, and you could go into the control room and listen on the big tannoy speakers, you know, instead of one big mono speaker out in the room the way it was in America. And after my first night was incredible. I heard a white label of Sgt. Pepper's. His friend brought one back to the apartment, and this was 3 months before it was released. So that I knew I entered a kind of a mystical fairy tale situation here. This is something in all my 22 years never happened to me. Not this close to the insider business of the music business, inside business there. So the next day, I go to a session with him, a Manfred Mann session. And they were a tough band. They had hits. They'd been around the block several times. And he was producing them. And then he announces to me, this is my second day, 5 hours into the session, that he's got another session down the road. He was very popular at the time. And he said, I'm going to leave you in charge for a few hours. So I had only watched him work for 5 hours. And then he says, bye-bye, and leaves me with Manfred Mann. And like, there is a form of British cynicism and humor mixed together that I wasn't aware of. They spoke to me in the rudest of terms, like whenever I made suggestions and all that, very sarcastic things they were saying. And I actually said, you know, in Brooklyn, them's fighting words, you know. And but we managed to get through it. I mean, when I said, okay, here's take 7, lucky take 7, they went, oh my God, you know, when I said lucky take 7. I mean, that was so, apparently so corny, they couldn't even contain it, you know. So that was my trial of hellfire. The third day got a little bit better. I was with Denny all day, and he introduced me to Denny Lane from the Moody Blues and announced that he was going to produce records with Denny Lane as a solo artist, and that I should write strings for Denny Lane. So this is the main reason why Denny Cordell brought me over to England, to be a musician, to be an arranger, and to integrate and be a liaison between him and his artist, because he could not read or write music. He could hum ideas, sing ideas, but he's a little shy about that. He wouldn't do that in front of Clark Terry, but he would do it in front of me. We had this lovely relationship right off the bat. So I was interpreting his ideas, throwing in bits of my own from my experience. And we got along like that for about 6, 7, 8, 9 months maybe, before I even produced a record on my own. And that was from his recommendation. He says, you should go out and find somebody of your own now, because by then I knew how to be more confident and be more comfortable, and I was getting anglicized. I was developing my own form of sarcasm and cynicism,
Sure.
and even a little bit of an accent. So I kind of went native, and that's how, it was a very intense year, that first year.
Sure.
That's how I really got good in a very short space of time. I worked night and day.
In this period now, where you are, you find David Bowie and Mark Bolan.
Yeah.
And you sign them to a production deal? Is that
That's
an
right.
accurate?
No.
How to talk about that a little bit?
Okay. Well, one of the first things I did when I was told to go out, before I found Mark Bolan, I was assigned a few other people. People did walk into our office and want to be produced by Denny, and Denny felt that I should be the producer of those people rather than him. And there was one guy called Biddu, who was an Indian musician and singer who went on to be, he wrote that song, Everybody's Kung Fu Fighting.
Oh yeah, of course.
So he was not at that level yet, but Biddu was actually my first production. Didn't work out. And when I told Denny said to me, just go find people that you can work with, that you feel you can work with. So my first night out on the town, I noticed that there was a group called Tyrannosaurus Rex that I saw advertised a lot, and the DJ John Peel liked them, and I liked John Peel's taste in music. So I went to this club and saw Mark Bolan and Steve Peregrine Took sitting cross-legged on the stage on a little tiny carpet, singing to a mesmerized audience of about maybe 200 kids. They and I had no idea. It was a dark stairwell. And I'm used to rock and roll, where there's people standing up and dancing around and things being noisy. But I saw the magic power that Mark had over the audience. This was something I wasn't quite expecting. I wanted to discover the next Beatles. Mm-hmm. So that's what I expected to find.
Right.
So I went up to Mark afterwards. I was mesmerized too, and I spoke to him. And he asked for my business card. He acted very blasé, and said, you're the 7th record producer who came in this week to watch us, and John Lennon was here last night, and he wants to sign us to his label called Grapefruit. He was making all this stuff up, which is kind of the kind of person he turned out to be. But anyway, the next morning at 10 a.m., he rings from the street from a call box, puts his money in, calls us up, and he said, we just happen to be passing your office, and we'd like to come up and play music for Denny Cordell. We'd like to audition. I said, well, I put my hand on the phone, and
Right.
Denny's sitting there, and I said, this is that band I was telling you about last night. So he said, invite them up. So they did. They came up, and they had that little carpet with them. They put it on the floor, sat down on the floor, and went through the set that I had heard the night before. And Denny did like them, and said, okay, we'll call you and leave us a number and all that. And as they left, he said, well, one thing we don't have on our label is an underground group. So this will be our token underground group. This is his exact words. And so that's what happened.
He sort of agreed to that, and you ended up going in and...
Yeah, he said, go make an album. Go make an album with them, and I'll give you £400, which even by today's standards, that's not a lot of money. That's sort of like today, maybe, I don't know, $1,000.
Right. You were already mentioning that Mark had a bit of a attitude. One of the things I want to talk to you about, it's a little bit more of an overarching question, but it applies here, is that it seemed a little different then for people just sort of walking in the door, or you going there and just saying, I like your music, let's work together, as opposed to the relationship that you later had with David, where you guys had a really great friendship, and you had a really amazing sort of working relationship and friendship, and how impactful that was on the music and the way that that was let David be, you know, who he needed to be in a probably a very comfortable place.
Yeah.
You just walking into a club and saying, let's make a record essentially with this band, and then, you know, you don't really even know these people.
No.
So how did that all sort of
well, I did.
play out?
Mark and I he came to my apartment. I had a stereo tape machine in my apartment in Earl's Court. And before we went into the studio, knowing I only had 4 days in the studio, which was 2 days to record, 2 days to mix, he recorded all those songs, that set, and I still have that tape, you know, live sitting down in my living room. And we became friends consequently, because he liked my apartment. He lived with his mom and dad.
Okay.
And so he loved coming to my apartment, so he became a friend as well. And we had a friendship almost until the day he died.
Right,
you know.
so you developed a rapport with him before you even,
you
know,
needed to.
Through, yeah. I mean, that's what I was sort of getting at.
Yeah, I also had an electric bass and an electric guitar in my flat, which he didn't have, you know. So that was another lure, you know, that. And later on, the bathtub, because when he lived away from his mom, he lived in a place that didn't have a bathtub. So he used to come to my house once a week with his girlfriend to have a bath, you know. You can't get friendlier than that. Come on.
No, that's yeah, multiple levels of friendly.
So, to answer your question, about a month or two later, my Denny Cordell's partner calls me in, and he's a publisher, and he said, I published this guy called David Bowie. We don't know what to do with him. He said, let me play you some stuff, would you mind? And I said, no. He played me 3 songs from his first album before Space Oddity. It was on a company called DRAM. And one song was like a pop song. The next was like a very morbid Halloween song, and called Mr. Gravedigger. And a third one was like a musical, like Anthony Newley, like What Kind of Fool Am I? You know. Okay. So I said, and he had a lovely voice, and I could tell from his lyrics he was great. But I told David Platts, the man who was his publisher, I said, he's all over the place. He's just all over the place. He goes, you're right, he is all over the place. He goes, but you seem to be an expert with these weird artists. And he was referring to Mark Bolan.
Bolan, right.
And he said, maybe you could get him you know, under control. And I said, well, I would. I think I like him a lot. And he goes, well, would you like to meet him? And I said, yes, I would. He goes, well, he's in the next room. And David was waiting in the next room. This was a setup.
Oh, yeah. It was destiny.
Yeah, David was waiting in the next room to meet me. And I'll cut a very long story short. We had about 1 million things in common, from Frank Zappa to an underground group called the Fugs. We loved anything strange and weird and underground. And we spent the whole day together. Like when the office closed, we just kept talking and walking and having a conversation. And he became a really good friend almost immediately.
Right. I mean, that's so amazing that from the very seed of the relationship all the way to Blackstar, you guys both have maintained, and I know this because we have mutual friends, and that your passion for music and new artists and being an avid listener, and the same goes for David. When I heard that David Bowie had heard Sun Kill Moon records, I just about, you know, lost my mind.
Yeah.
I was so happy to hear that. Not for my own sort of wow, that's amazing, but just that somebody that had achieved that much, they never, either of you really have never checked out or just sort of rested on your laurels. It seems like there's been a constant desire to stay in it, be relevant, be an avid music fan and a real listener of what's going on. I think that's important to sort of point out, you know, because what you just said, you'd stay after and just put your favorite weird records on.
We had a great relationship about discovering other artists, and then we turn each other on to those artists. You know, we were always on the lookout for something new and different. That happened with Young Americans, when he was saying he was doing live. He was already doing a Bruce Springsteen song called "Saint in the City," and I had a good friend who was a DJ at WMMR in Philadelphia, and he just announced on the radio about an hour before I went to the recording studio that Bruce Springsteen came in the studio and dropped off a cassette of his new album. So I phoned my friend and I said, could you bring Bruce Springsteen to the studio, because David Bowie and I are making a record here, and I know David would love to meet him. So I've got a great photo from that day. Bruce came in, he was nobody then. He was very underground, very unknown, only known in the tri-state area, the New York tri-state area.
Had he been making records yet?
Yeah, he was. Well, maybe this was his very
or...
first album. I don't know how David heard of him, but he heard about him, but neither of us heard his music. So I except Saint in the City. So obviously he had made at least one album.
Okay.
And David knew that one. And that kept going through, you know, we would start every album with, like, have you heard this person lately? Have you heard that? Like Mercury Rev or something like that. We'd make a few references because there were people out there who David could make an association with, or could see that they're doing something a little different, a little bit off the beaten path, which was always his mode, to go a little off the beaten path and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clearly that it was a constantly, like, not just do the same record. Why? We just made it, you know, so.
Yeah, we never repeated ourselves. The one thing we used to say was, like, because everyone sees the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's as the pinnacle of the Beatles' career, we always said to ourselves, we're going to go in, every album we'd say, we're going to make our Sgt. Pepper's now. This is going to be our best album ever, you know.
Lofty goals. Good, good.
And then it became a joke afterwards, because we made, like, Scary Monsters, and then it became like, God, I hope we can make a record as good as Scary Monsters again.
Right.
That was a good record.
So the first record that you worked on with David was
Space Oddity.
Right.
Yeah.
And where did you guys do that, and what was that process like? Was it fast? You make that record quickly, like?
Well, prior to that, we made a few singles for his DRAM
right.
label, which didn't work out. They were putting all their money on Cat Stevens at the time, and they dropped David. Apparently, they couldn't keep both artists. They just dropped David in favor of Cat Stevens. So with Space Oddity, he got this deal with Mercury Records, and his manager got him a deal with Mercury, and we're going in. They knew that we were making this new album. They liked the new material, which was kind of folk rock. You know, all the other records, Unwashed and Somewhat Slightly Dazed, all those Janine, all those songs, they were written on his 12-string guitar. I was doing what his publisher told me to do, was keep them in this one style that people can relate to, and that was his kind of folk rock style. Just before we start making the album, he writes Space Oddity. I don't know what inspired him. Well, I do know what inspired him, but I didn't think he would write a song about it. And that was that he and our friend, a guy called Sam Hutt, who was a doctor, we went to see Space Odyssey, the film, Kubrick, Space Odyssey, Kubrick. And we were stoned out of our brains. And he said later on, what the film was about was that feeling of isolation, which he maintains was always a theme in his songs anyway. And he found, like, with that film, he was able to express it in the form of an astronaut inside a capsule floating around the Earth, with billions of people on the Earth and billions of stars in the sky, and yet he's all alone. And I saw it mainly as a cheap shot. I thought, David, all the songs you've been playing for me are nothing like Space Oddity. You know, you're not going to write another song like that. He never did, actually. He never did write another song like that. I said, I don't like it. It's not in line. It's not in line with what we're going into the studio with, what we've rehearsed and all that. So he said, well, I have to tell you that they're not going to let me record the album unless I record this. And I said, okay, well, there's Gus Dudgeon down the hall. He's our friend. He's dying to work with you. Gus Dudgeon, of course, worked with Elton John, and maybe he'll like to do it. So David took my advice, went to Gus Dudgeon, and they recorded Space Oddity. And when he came back with that record, I thought it was amazing. I thought, wow, because the demo was pretty good. But still, I didn't see how it was going to fit on the album. And if you really listen to that album, it doesn't fit on the album. It opens the album. And the rest of the album's pretty good. And in all truth, there were no other singles from that album. David wasn't really a singles writer yet. didn't understand how to write a single. And Space Oddity was more of an event. You know, it was almost a novelty record, something that initially DJs wouldn't play. So it took a while for that to even chart. I think it was released 3 times before it got stuck and finally started climbing the charts.
Right, can you imagine that happening today? I mean, that's just like, it's just like...
Well, that wouldn't happen today, and I don't think Space Oddity would be written today. You know, it's just different times. But he always put himself out on a limb, and that's what I loved about him. You know, he'd always take a risk. I'd take risks all the time, and that's the way we fit into with each other. We fit well together.
Yeah. So true or false? You mix Diamond Dogs on a mixing console on sawhorses in your apartment kitchen or your house kitchen.
Okay. False. Partially true, but false. I had a good year. I think it was 74 or 75, and money-wise, I had a lot of hits, T.Rex hits, everything. And my accountant said, you better spend a lot of money quickly, or else you're going to have to pay this to the Queen.
Tax, yeah.
The Queen will get your money. And so I had a house that I just bought, and I wanted to have a home studio. So, and I had a little family. My wife and I had a young son, and it was just, we found the perfect house in Hammersmith in London, and had the ground floor gutted and refitted with an isolated room where you could, it was isolated from the houses next door to us. It was like a room within a room, built on cement pillars that went down into the earth and all that. And I bought a Trident B range from my friend Malcolm Toft, who is a great designer and all that. And I built a studio in my house. Like, it was a studio, it wasn't a kitchen. And it was a small control room, a studio that could, in a squeeze, have 5 musicians. I had a drum booth, so I could have 4 more musicians out there. It had a great sound. I even did string quartets in that room. But no, there was the kitchen was upstairs in my house where my people lived. There was no kitchen involved. No kitchen was harmed. And I had a dark room, however, just in the next room downstairs. So I used to develop. I used to put it all away. I used to put all the chemicals away for the recording sessions. But so that was my man cave, basically.
Yeah. And were you doing most of your productions there after it was built, or were you working at other studios in London?
What I was able to do there was most of my mixing.
Okay.
And if I had a big rock group, I really couldn't record a big rock group there. So I would do drums and very, very loud guitars in other studios, and then come back and finish my productions. I couldn't do big string sections, so I'd have to go out for that as well. But I could do about 50% of my recording and 100% of my mixing there. And it's true that on the first day, my first client was David Bowie. I told him about, he phoned me up and he said, I just produced this album myself, and I've been all over town to get a mix. I can't get a mix anywhere. I've tried 10, 11 studios. And I said, David, I just built a studio in my house. And he says, can I come and see it? I said, yeah, bring a tape. You know, it's all ready to go.
Right.
And then there was this one oversight. I didn't have any chairs yet. They were being ordered, you know. And so he came there, and I had carpenter's horses because we were still doing some construction, or we just finished our construction. And he and I sat on these carpenter horses whilst we mixed the first track of Diamond Dogs.
Okay.
And it turned out great.
That's where the sawhorses come in.
Yeah, and the rest of the thing where people might have gotten the impression that there was a kitchen there was that we didn't move in upstairs yet. My family didn't move in. There was no furniture in the whole house. But he wanted to come late every night. He wanted to start at about 7 and work into the night, and he wanted to eat there. So the following day, a big furniture truck pulled up outside my house, and he bought a whole dining set for me. 4 chairs, a table, silverware, cutlery, dishes, cups, glasses, napkins.
Wow.
And we put those into the studio section where he and I every night would dine.
Nice.
We'd have the food delivered.
Right.
And hot food delivered. That was unusual in those days. There was no, delivery food services.
Well, finally we get the truth.
Yeah.
And so was that the record that you used the first digital delay on?
Yes, I was an early user of Eventide, and and also the very first sampling that was even possible. So I got the Eventide stereo digital delay, and this was wonderful for putting things left and right in the mix, very tight delays, which you can hear on the record, used on the drums, on the vocals, special effects. And at the end of the record, it was a song called Big Brother, and he wanted the word brother repeated again and again to go into echo. And I thought, yeah, great. I said, I've got this thing, the digital delay, where there's a button, I could throw it into the delay and it will sample the word brother. Unfortunately, the sampling was only up to about 75 milliseconds, So I got in the bruth instead of brother. So at the end of it, you hear bruth, right. And it was the Eventide recycling the bruth, and then I faded it out into plate echo and all that. Yeah. But he liked that better. I said, I'm sorry, David, I can't get brother into it. He goes, no, that's better. He said,
it's weirder.
That's weirder and better and cooler.
Yeah, and so also, were you using the harmonizer at that time?
I'm not sure I had the harmonizer yet. I'm not sure it was available, but when it was available, it would be for the next album I produced, which was Low.
Right.
So I think I got the harmonizer in the interim, and in my home studio, I put on a master tape of something, and I played every instrument through it to see exactly what I can do with this pitch shifting device. And when it came time to put it on drums, I went nuts with it, and I said, this is a sound I have never heard before.
Right.
And it was that snare drum. After the snare drum was hit, it would go boom like that. And that was just dropping the pitch by maybe 10% and increasing the feedback.
Right.
So I took that to Paris with me in about, another couple of months later, and no one had even heard of the harmonizer, heard what it can do. But I showed David and Dennis Davis, the drummer, what it can do to the snare. So.
Of course, there were tape echoes and stuff being applied with Beatles and, automatic double tracking and all that stuff. But how were you sort of plugged into that in terms of a company making these new products? I mean, how did you come to be involved with Eventide? And it's, like you said, nobody had heard this stuff before, and you probably were using it in ways that were unintentional.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to Tony Agnello. He made it. He and his partner made it, knowing that the main application was to change pitch without changing time. And when I was a good customer of the company who was selling me audio equipment, and they knew I was a really good customer. Like when I built my studio, I spent thousands on the equipment, the multi-track tape. They sold everything to me.
Right.
So when the first harmonizer appeared, they phoned me before it was even made available. They said, Tony, we've got something for you. And it was horrendously expensive.
I'm sure.
I said, what does it do? And they said it changes pitch, but not time. I went, I want it. And it was delivered the next day, and I had the first one in England, and no one knew I had it. No one knew it was available. It became available about 6 months later. So I went to Paris with it, did all these tricks with it, and then when even the record was released before the harmonizer was released. So everyone asked me, how did you get that sound? No one knew.
Right. Oh, right.
Yeah. And I wouldn't tell anybody. I said, I don't know, this is something I don't know who invented phasing and flanging, but I invented this, and I'm not going to give that secret away too quickly.
Right. When you're approaching a session now, or when you're deciding to work with an artist, has your process changed that much in terms of pre-production and who you're choosing to work with? And are the songs the most important thing? Are the people the most important thing? Like, what are you looking for? And then how are you proceeding with a project?
Well, from the early days, I had good luck with producing mavericks, rebels, Mark Bolan and David Bowie. Later on, Thin Lizzy, who was like a pretty radical rock group. They weren't straight up, they were different,
Yeah.
And that's who I always gravitated towards, and always felt that I can't do the same old thing what other people are doing. I can't listen to the top 20 and imitate that. I'm really no good at that. And of course, the joke is that if you do imitate that, if you don't get it out fast enough, it sounds stale. But if you're following today's trend, it's going to come out in 2 or 3 months, and it's going to sound stupid and stale. What I figured on doing is make something radically different every time, and the chances are far better of getting a hit with something that sounds strange.
Right.
Because the public's not dumb. They want something different. You know, they don't want the same bland thing all the time. I mean, I think I'm part of that public. There's not some members of the public maybe do want the same sound all the time, but I'm part of that public who likes the more adventurous music. And so I make the music for myself, really.
When somebody comes to you, are you doing an interview with them, seeing if you like them as a person, seeing what the music's like, and then how are you sort of discussing your vision with them?
I will meet someone. I will listen to demos first. I mean, I wouldn't even have a meeting if I wasn't interested. So I will be sent demos, and nowadays I'm directed to a site, you know, with a hidden site. And if I like the music, then the person will come in. And it's the reverse. I don't tell them what my vision is. I want to know what their vision is. Where do they want this record to go, and why did they pick me? Because I have a few various ways I can go. I've been involved in so many different genres. You know, do they want the T.Rex sound? Do they want the Bowie sound? I was instrumental in creating a lot of people's sounds, you know, but it's always like the artist kind of, I feel what they need and what will amplify what they do, what'll you know, magnify what they do. And so I'm interested in their vision. And then I'm tenacious as a producer. I remind them constantly throughout the production that that's what their goal is, what their desire is, you know, because they could lose their way and often do. And artists, you know, and sometimes you're in the middle of making a record, you'll hear something new coming out on the market, and you want to jump horses in the midstream and do that sound and all that. So I just keep everybody in the same zone for the making of the album, and it's their vision that's more interesting than mine.
And sometimes you're playing bass, sometimes you're hiring the band, sometimes it is a band.
Yeah, I'm very versatile. I find myself often joining the band, in the sense of their fifth member. And with David Bowie, it's always been a partnership. We always, like after the Spiders from Mars, he and I have always been the band with other people. So I'm either playing bass for him, or I played guitar for him many times, and I've sung backing vocals with him. Or we, you know, the two of us have very strong opinions, and we collaborate on how the drummer should play, and you know, all that. So we've always been a team, and I was that way with Mark Bolan, really, because Mark Bolan was, once he'd get his stuff down on tape, which was the basic band sound, then, you know, and I would guide them through their performances, get the right take, sometimes edit 2 takes together and all that. But then that's where I kicked in with the string writing, the backing vocals, and the mixing. I've always mixed my productions with very few exceptions.
Right, and have you been always engineering them as well?
I started engineering because when I had my own studio, I engineered all the time, you know. I used to love to set up mics in front of drums and all that. That's the most challenging thing to do. And find newer ways to record a guitar amp. You know, I mean, my gosh, I've gone through so many permutations and mics, and from building metal tunnels out of, you know, the stuff you build houses with, and making little caves to put the guitar amp in.
Yeah.
I've tried all things. But then one day I just grew tired of engineering. I wanted to concentrate more on the music, and I thought, that first part of the album, I'm finding, you know, getting the backing tracks done, I'm finding too exhausting. I didn't want to do it anymore. So over the years, I've been blessed with finding and working with some very talented engineers, and not all of them worked out well. Some of them, you know, were too addicted to their own sound. Mm-hmm. And I think a really successful engineer, like if they have an identifiable drum sound, it's almost like having an old kind of hit sound. You know, that's going to grow tired and old. Mm-hmm. So the engineers that successfully work with me are open to changing their normal way of working, you know, and they'll listen to my suggestions and my ideas, because I could call them out on anything. You know, they can't pull wool over my eyes. I mean,
yeah.
I know everything about engineering.
Yeah.
So, but I would prefer someone else who's a real expert take over those chores at the beginning. Usually, for instance, with Blackstar, I use Kevin Killen, mm-hmm. and I adore him. He's an amazing engineer. But once we stopped tracking, it was then David and myself. So I took over the engineering for the easier stuff like vocals, sax overdubs, strings, things like that. Well, sometimes strings I don't engineer anymore, but if I had to write them, it's nicer to have an engineer take. But like in the old days, I used to conduct the string section, go in and get the string sound, and have my tape op punch us in and all that,
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's because maybe I was afraid to let go as well in those days.
Sure.
But now I don't mind.
Yeah. Well, it's nice. The collaboration is good, and it spurs new thoughts and ideas. So with Blackstar, was that different having that band come in and play live, and what was this, how did you guys make that
Making
record?
Blackstar was like making any other David Bowie album. We would start with a live band. David always started out with a live band, and through the years, you know who they are. We had used many drummers, many guitarists, and the only difference was this was a special band in the sense that it was the first time we worked with a non-rock band. I mean, all the musicians in the past, like Earl Slick and Reeves Gabrels and Mick Ronson, they were rock and rollers. The guitarists, the drummers were rock and rollers. Here we had this very well rehearsed, they were more like classical musicians, where they practiced seriously, like 7 hours a day. Like a really great jazz musician has the same training as a classical musician, like a violinist. The difference was that a lot of Blackstar would take ones. We would look at each other aghast after a take one and go, well, I can't see how we could improve on that. And the band would kind of just stand there, just waiting, like, should we do a take two? And we did a few, but most of the time, because they play live,
And it sounded like David was in the room with them singing, even if the lyrics weren't totally finished. And
Yeah,
that he was really part of the band, and not just, when you hear things like that, it's very encouraging to hear, because he really is in there with them. He's in the trenches making the record and helping feed them. I mean, what his vision was.
Well, for the both of us, our challenge was he wanted me to go and listen to them live well before we recorded the album. So I did see their live shows a lot, like he did. And he knew that it was going to be challenging for us. We knew that these guys were really a high cut of musicians. They were really up there technically and creatively. So he had to really get up to scratch, and so did I as a producer when we were working with these guys. I never did anything so complicated in my life, but yeah, he was in the trenches. He was really enjoying himself. And so was Donnie McCaslin and his band. They had never done anything like this themselves. So we were challenging each other. They never, David was always like by then, he was writing very memorable songs, and Donnie McCaslin's material is basically instrumental, and they're just blowing all the time. They're just like doing improvisation and all that. So they had to be, corralled into a certain structure. Which was absolutely wonderful.
Well, it's interesting because he is, subsequently gone on to put singers on his records, and I know he's done some collaborations with Mark, and it sort of tilted him in a new direction as well by having that opportunity. And the spirit of that record is for multiple reasons, very special.
Well, from the day we met, he told me how much he loved Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker. Like, he was always a jazz aficionado. And I think all his life he flirted. He worked with Gil Evans on Absolute Beginners, and he flirted with making a jazz album almost all his life. But he finally got his wish.
Yeah, and there's wisps of that throughout his career.
Yeah.
And especially the vocals and the melody, they're often very they were often very esoteric and sort of odd, the way that the melody sat over the harmonic changes and stuff. It was, Bowie always had an amazing knack for those melodies. Were so unique.
His melodies and his chord changes too. He was always put in that odd chord where you would least expect it, and that was part of his hallmark as well as a writer.
And even on the hits.
Yeah.
Like even a track like Let's Dance. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty weird.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing. I also wanted to talk about you have a solo record, and are you producing it? And how is that being the artist and producer for you? Do you need, desire, are repulsed by, you know, an outside opinion on your own stuff, you know, that you've provided to so many people? You've played that role. How can you play it for yourself?
Well, I told that little story about how my publisher hated my songs and set me on this career as a record producer, and that was about 50 years ago. And I did make a solo album in the late 70s, which wasn't really good. I didn't like it. I mean, there's about half of it I do like, and the other half I had no right recording. But okay, so 25, 30 years on now, I've gained so much experience, and I've worked with some of the best songwriters in the world, which kind of I've absorbed. You know, I've seen and I've kind of felt through David and working with other people just how to write a good song. So, and I was pretty harsh with myself because I recorded 11 songs. I wrote the 11th song just about 2 weeks before the album was finished. And I threw away about 25 songs. So I was really critical of myself, and I think I made the right choices. And I don't think, you know, like to get someone in to produce me at this stage, I think I know what I'm doing now as a producer. Again, I have to say 50 years, it's not a short time, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I did the first one, my first new album, and I'm talking about 2 albums now. So there's one out now called It's a Selfie. It's only been out digitally for a few weeks, but I'm getting the CDs and the vinyls made. I'm holding off on the vinyl. I don't know if it's going to warrant, I don't know how many records I'm going to sell, but I do gigs with my band Holy Holy, and I know we can sell CDs at the people who come to our shows always want to buy CDs, you know. But anyway, with this one, all I did really was made my demos that I produced over the last 10 years sound better and better and better. I kept tweaking the vocals, tweaking the lyrics, doing my own drum loops and drum programming, playing my own bass parts, even tweaking them, re-recording. So then I came to the conclusion, why do I have to re-record this album with real musicians? This sounds really good to me. A lot of people are doing this. A lot of people are the only artist on their own records. So I released It's a Selfie, and I called it It's a Selfie because it's a selfie.
Yeah.
And I continued it being a selfie with all the photos on the sleeve. I took all the photos. They were all selfies too.
Nice.
So I thought, okay, this is a good theme. This is really good, and it's a fun idea.
Yeah, it's fun.
But immediately upon releasing It's a Selfie, I started writing my next album. And I am now 3.5 songs into my new album, which is kind of taking political overtones. I don't know why, but...
Yeah, I don't know why.
Because I think I want someone removed from office as soon as possible. But anyway, this album will no doubt come out. It'll be ready for next October.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm working towards. But however, I'm writing this album in a year's time. Like, it's only going to take me about 6 months to write this album instead of 12 years. Mm-hmm. So this one, as soon as I get these 3 songs up to scratch, which they are now, I'm going to start recording with real musicians next month. So the new album will be a totally different concept to the one that's out now.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to do a David Bowie on myself and be radical and be different. And
yeah, you got to do
repeat.
You to you.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm not opposed to working with a producer. There's so many people, like my son Morgan, a lot of people whose ideas I respect, you know.
Right.
No one's asked to produce my album, though. So.
They're intimidated. What's knocking your socks off musically? Like, what bands are you listening to that are getting you excited, or somebody that you'd love to work with, or just records that you find yourself being gravitated, back to?
Well, I always look forward to the next Mark Kozelek album.
Yep.
This is something we started listening to, David and I. David turned me on to him. He played Mark's album Benji to me, and I was aghast. I said, who is this guy? He's amazing. I didn't know about his former bands or anything like that. I knew nothing about Mark. And then I went online to see some he's had some scathing articles written about him too. I said, well, I like him. I really do like him, because if he can write music like that, he's bound to insult some people and, you know, be outspoken and all that. And so I really put him like on top of my list. I would really love to work with him. My only fear is that I kind of worship him, and whereas, you know, I avoided worshiping David Bowie because I grew up with him. You know, he was a friend of 48 years. You know, we were contemporaries. Mark is somebody who just came into my life, and I'm still trying to figure him out. Yeah. I've had social meetings. I've had dinners and lunches with him. We did a mutual interview for some magazine or something like that. But Mark is just sensational. His insight and his style of writing, his talking, singing style, plus his musicianship, which is incredible.
Yeah, and it's morphed over time. I mean, talk about somebody that hasn't just sat around and done the same things. I mean, a lot of those Red House Painters records were very sort of the same.
Yeah.
They were very American Music Club scene, like sadcore, slow, wet, you know, and beautiful.
He's liberated himself from that.
Yeah, and then from the Sun Kill Moon stuff, and then moving into only playing nylon string guitar, and then sort of getting more into the spoken word thing, and just, you know, it's really continued to push into a direction, and his output is phenomenal. Like, God, I don't know how many records that guy puts out a year, but it's not one.
And I saw him live twice, and once with a trio and once solo. And it's just as fascinating. You know, I could listen to, you know, a 2-hour concert, just him and a guitar.
Yeah, it's very, very haunting and melancholy. And of course, as you know, and you get to know Mark, what a genuinely sweet, caring person he is. You know, he's not all the internet hoo-ha. You know?
No, I know. He's a one-off. He's a real unique one-off person. And I wouldn't know what I could do with him as a producer, but I know that I like him so much that something would result. We would find something to do together. I know he records fairly quickly too, which I'm not unknown. You know, that's not unknown to me. David used to record very quickly. Even Blackstar sessions were like quick. You know.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't force him into a long, tedious, you know, concept album. You know.
Yeah.
But I could introduce some new flavors into his style.
Yeah. Well, I know that the admiration is mutual. So
yeah, well, maybe one day that'll happen.
Yeah.
There's an artist I've been associated with for a few years now, and that's Christine Young.
Okay.
She's a great singer-songwriter originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and I produced about maybe 5 albums with her, and then the one before the last one, I said to her, you should produce yourself, you know, and I said, you should get the credit because so many of these ideas are yours. She writes brilliant arrangements, and I was getting all the credit in the press for writing her arrangements. So 2 albums ago, she was the producer of her album, and I was kind of co-producer, but I didn't want the credit. I didn't need the credit. I was just happy to be part of it. And then her last album, she threw you've got to, this album must be heard by more people. She threw a real sidewinder at me, and she said, I want to do the new album on cassette, on 8-track cassette. And I said, yeah, you and everybody else. I said, do you know what the problems are? And she says, I want to do it on cassette. I like the way my voice sounds on cassette. I know I've got a very bright voice that some people consider harsh, but I know whenever I record myself on a cassette recorder, I sound nice. I sound nice to myself. So I had an 8-track Tascam that I got renovated. Luckily, in this building, there's a place that fixes old audio equipment.
How convenient.
Yeah, very convenient. It cost a lot of money to get it renovated, but when I put a chromium cassette in there and we started recording, the results were fantastic. I used the DBX noise reduction.
Yeah.
Or maybe I didn't, and I think I switched it out. So I just recorded hot, and I said to Christine that if you want tape to sound great, you're going to have to record it hot. You know, you have to blow it out a little bit.
Yeah.
But the machine was so well lined up, and chromium tape is so durable that as hot as I could record, I never really quite got it to saturate like old-fashioned analog tape. I mean, the tape speed was probably 3 3/4. I mean, you know, all these factors should have done it. But anyway, it did smooth out everything a bit, and it was a really nice sound. And once we bounced back and forth and we went as far as we could go, we went over to Pro Tools. And then we did some of her vocals in Pro Tools. And she said, see, I don't like that sound. I want it to sound like it's on tape. So I ended up flying her vocals back onto cassette and then flying it back into Pro Tools again, and we got the sound. And then I had a little problem of sometimes lining it up because the sync was never good.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
But that didn't matter. I had always had the reference in Pro Tools. Like I knew where to line up her
Sure.
analog. I could just line it up right with the way she sang it. So in the end, we have this album out now called The Subset, which is entirely produced by Christine Young, and I'm merely her engineer on it. And this woman has recorded with Bowie, so many people. Morrissey, she's recorded with Morrissey. She opened for Morrissey hundreds of times.
Wow.
So she's quite I don't know, she has the gravitas of David Bowie and other legends, She's
Yeah.
the stuff legends are made of, but she's not that famous yet.
Wow.
Christine Young, two E's, Kristeen.
All right. Well, thanks, David.
Tony.
Thanks, Tony. Wait, there's too much David Bowie.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at tapeop.com, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time.